Thank you, Wade. And thank you, Makiko and Adam, for talking a little bit about county fire, showing off wildfire in your dashboard. Right now, I believe the county is under a red flag weather warning event, which just means we've got some more severe wind, some drier conditions. So hopefully those two talks and that talk and my talk and what we're dealing with right now helps give us a sense of the situation of what's going on in the county in terms of wildfire resilience. So my talk today, a LiDAR display of Santa Clara County Fire Department's fuel breaks, should be a delightful one. We're mostly going to be talking and looking at displays of LiDAR data, which is something that is actually pretty neat to look at if you've never seen it. The background is the Santa Clara County Fire Department is committed to reaching its wildfire resilience and public safety goals. The department's Vasona Fire Fuels crew, which we call the V Crew, is a team of 12 strong, and they regularly assess vegetation and strategically mitigate wildfire hazards in and around the communities it serves. This work helps harden the evacuation routes and fortify the wildland fuel breaks that may be used during a wildfire threat. This presentation will spotlight some of the V Crew's key protective and strategic fuel breaks from 2022 and explore vegetation management through a LiDAR display of pre- and post-hazard mitigation work. So here's an overview. We are the Santa Clara County Fire Department. Now, despite the name, our service area does not cover the entire county. As the map implies, we cover this western swath of the county. We cover the 7 communities of Campbell, Cupertino, Los Altos Hills, Los Gatos, Redwood Estates, Saratoga, and the adjacent unincorporated areas. For the most part, we do not directly serve the other cities in the county, but you might see our white engines in some instances outside of those cities. Santa Clara County Fire is an internationally accredited fire protection district, which holds us to a certain standard of service. We are an all-hazard organization that provides the following services: fire suppression, domestic preparedness, hazardous materials, wildland fire suppression, community education and risk reduction services, technical rescue, emergency medical services, fire prevention, wildland fire mitigation, and fire investigation. For this talk, we'll focus mostly on the wildfire mitigation aspect. As you can see, as you can infer from this map, half of our service area is in the foothills of the Santa Cruz Mountains, an area that the state considers high and very high fire hazard severity. To address the growing concern and threat of wildfire risk to the communities we serve, our department developed a preventative wildfire management program and recognized its importance in our strategic plan. Now, our strategic plan is a core document that guides the department in making continuous improvements to our service model. In 2022, the department's Vasona crew was founded. Each member of the 12-person crew is highly skilled in chainsaw and hand power tool management to carry out their assigned duties. They work seasonally on public lands throughout the district, implementing fuel reduction projects, which enhance safety, efficiency, and effectiveness of wildfire response efforts, as well as emergency evacuation operations. Some of the work done by the Vasona crew is managing fuel breaks. Now, a fuel break, as pictured here on the left side, is a strip of land that has reduced vegetation continuity and low that will slow down an expanding wildfire. In other words, if a wildfire is approaching a fuel break, the fuel break should slow down the fire parameter significantly. And it also gives fire response efforts more time and a greater containment opportunity with that break. So we use 2 kinds of fuel breaks, strategic and protective. A strategic fuel break is placed for advanced firefighting techniques. These are commonly ridgelines and fire roads. A protective fuel break is one that creates a buffer of reduced fuel loading to help insulate critical infrastructure and assets from wildfire. These are commonly evacuation routes and defensible space around buildings. Here's an example of a fuel break progress listing report I generated from our fuel breaks from 2023. It shows that we had 15 completed fuel breaks, 1 in progress, and 2 in the planning phase. Now, one key objective of our administration planning division is finding opportunities to connect these fuel breaks to create wildfire resilience and connectivity across the entire jurisdiction. So if there's a wildfire threat, as Makiko pointed to at the 2020 CZU fire, we'll have these fuel breaks in place, which are essential infrastructure for our fire suppression staff. Now, the pageant wave fuel break shown here is a 100 feet by 823 feet long project area. Fuel break that works to reduce fuel around the Los Gatos Public Library and Los Gatos Montessoreno Police Department. This fuel break covers 2.31 acres, but as we'll show in this presentation, the V Crew's work addresses different strata of the vegetation, and this project was completed in 2022. So here's our first fly-through video of LiDAR, which captures vegetation in 3 dimensions. And the LiDAR points are colored by a true color composite RGB image. Now we're only showing the vegetation here. I've removed hard infrastructure like buildings and roads just to spotlight the vegetation. Before the V crew went out to do their work, this is more or less what they were seeing when planning. So you can see right in the middle, there's a tall conifer tree, for example. Now, if you're unfamiliar with LiDAR, it's a way to measure 3D structures with light. It's commonly used in iPhones for face unlock and for self-driving in some cars. LiDAR is also incredibly helpful in GIS. Now, our department is one of the many partners in the Santa Clara County Regional Imagery and LiDAR Acquisition program managed by Yoko and the Santa Clara County GIS team. This team manages and organizes the capturing, processing, validating, and delivery of countywide LiDAR data to other agencies in our department every 3 years. One of the use cases our department is interested in is using LiDAR to evaluate the work our hand crew does to manage field breaks in wildfire risk areas. Solid structures like ground and buildings are easily distinguished from the data, but soft or porous structures like trees and leaves specifically allow light to pass through them more easily. So with LiDAR, we can often gain a high-definition look of vegetation without having to be on the ground. We can assess the size, location, density, arrangement, and vegetation strata of various vegetative features on the ground without actually being there. So this graphic in the bottom left shows more or less the classification that we're going to use for the remainder of the presentation, where we've classified LiDAR points into high vegetation, which is 30 feet and above, medium vegetation, which is 6 feet to 30 feet, and low vegetation, which is 0 to 6 feet. So here's that same patch of vegetation before the Vasona crew went and did some hazardous mitigation work around the public library, classified in those ranges. So you can see lots of light green vegetation. That's vegetation, along the ground, 0 to 6 feet. Medium vegetation, again, is that 6 to 30 foot range, and then dark green is that 30 foot and above. Ooh, ah. Yeah, okay. Now here's a fly-through of the classified LiDAR from 2022 after the Vasona crew went through and cleared out the vegetation. At first glance, it might not look like a lot has changed, but as I'll show in the next slide, there's quite a bit done here. So our department is interested in quantifying the hazards removed. By converting the 2020 and 2022 classified LiDAR datasets into rasters for each of the low, medium, and high vegetated classes, I was able to perform a GIS analysis to identify the amount of vegetation removed per unit area for each of those classes. And if you have any questions on that method, I can touch on those after the presentation. What we see from this graphic in the middle, I've sort of highlighted 3 main areas to target. That third graphic shows in orange vegetation that has been removed and identified from the analysis. Now, I have not been there on the ground to see what vegetation was removed. And after this analysis, I validated it with the Vasona crew, and they confirmed with pictures that this, in fact, was all the vegetation that they removed. So this was a very interesting test area for future analysis. So for Pageant Way, we can summarize the acres of vegetation strata mitigated in the following table. We have 0.29 acres of low vegetation were removed, which represents 39% of all low vegetation. We have 0.12 acres of medium vegetation removed, which represents 10% of all medium vegetation. And we have 0.06 acres of high vegetation removed, which represents 5% of all vegetation. Now, qualitatively, the Vasona crew mostly removed hazardous surface fuels that would enable a wildfire to spread rapidly along the surface, along the ground. And they removed also ladder fuels that would allow wildfire to move up into the canopy and spread through the canopy and create a more dramatic wildfire scenario. So the statistics, the numbers demonstrate that the Vasona crew has a standard practice of removing the low vegetation and the ladder fuels. Also, a few tree canopies were removed that were overhanging the Los Gatos Library, and that's represented there in that 39% vegetation also. And here's a nice graphic that shows in orange on the LiDAR. So all the orange points there are the vegetation that was removed by the Vasona crew. She's got it. Thank you. Okay, so next we'll move to Charcoal Road. Charcoal Road is a strategic fuel break that follows an old fire road off of Highway 35 in an area of steep topography. This fuel break is 200 feet wide and over 4,000 feet long, covering nearly 33 acres. When the 2022 LiDAR data was captured, this fuel break was still in progress and was only completed in 2023. So here we'll see a fly through the LiDAR data before the Vasona crew started work, mitigating the vegetation. So you can instantly see the steep topography, the slopes. Off in the distance, you'll see City of Cupertino, San Jose, the ridge line that we're not looking at in the foreground, but in the midground, that's Montebello Range there. And so this is really one of the only key connections between Highway 35, which is the county boundary, and Stevens Canyon Road at the bottom. It's popular for mountain bikers and hikers. So this represents a really key piece of infrastructure for the fire department to know that if a fire is crossing the county, we will use this as a strategic fuel break to put resources to help contain the fire from spreading further into the communities we serve. And here's Charcoal Road again, showing, but now showing in the classified vegetation ranges. Here we're zoomed in a little bit more, and you can start to see the individual points of the LiDAR for each sort of leaf or structure on the ground. You can see those conifers. This is there's lots of chaparral and shrubs in this area that intermix with lots of conifers. Now, from a wildfire scenario, this is a pretty dramatic scene because this would allow wildfire to spread rapidly from the surface into the canopies. So the work done on this project is sort of a key example for our department for other strategic fuel breaks. Now in this next fly-through, you'll see the vegetation that was removed by the V crew in red, sort of changing up the process a little bit here. But at this glance, you can see sort of clusters of red, and as we zoom in, those clusters of red are actually individual trees, standing dead snags, dead trees that are also known as 1,000-hour fuels. So if those dead trees ignite, then that creates a more intense wildfire scenario that leads to a more dramatic scenario for everyone. So what was really unique from this analysis is I also did not go to Charcoal Road, but I was able to identify all the trees that the Vasona crew was able to remove without actually being there. And they validated it. They said, yeah, we did remove that, right? So you might be thinking, wow, lots of we're able to see vegetation removed, but what about vegetation grown? Maybe in a couple of years we could do another analysis and see how much vegetation has grown back, so things like that. These are topics that our department is just starting to evaluate now, and we're definitely waiting for the next LiDAR flight to see how much vegetation has grown back in this area. And one key part is revisit rates and frequency in order to go back and make sure that this fuel break is maintained long term. Here's a breakdown of the baseline conditions, the targeted hazards, and the post-hazard mitigation in progress status. It might be a little hard to see, but there's a breakout box for each of the, for those three images. Again, orange is the vegetation that was removed. So this is a heavily forested area, but the Vasona crew is able to tackle lots of vegetation at 2022 when the LiDAR was being flown. And in the middle graphic, you can actually tell that they're still in progress. So they worked from the south to the north. So they've reached probably about halfway at this point when the LiDAR was flown over top. So for Charcoal Road, we can summarize the acres of vegetation strata mitigated in the following table. We have 4.52 acres of high vegetation that were removed, which represents 15% of all high vegetation. We have 1.72 acres of medium vegetation that were removed, which represents 6% of all medium vegetation. And we have 4.32 acres of low vegetation removed, which represents 18% of all low vegetation. Qualitatively, the Vasona crew mostly removed hazardous surface fuels, just like they did on Pageant Way. And they removed ladder fuels, but unique to this area is they removed lots of standing dead trees that would have caused a wildfire to burn at high intensities and lead to a more unpredictable wildfire scenario. So following these two fuel breaks, the Vasona crew is interested in analysis using the next LiDAR dataset to evaluate how much vegetation has regrown in order to evaluate the frequency of revisiting Charcoal Road and Pageant Way to maintain effectiveness as a strategic fuel break. And in summary, since 2022, the Santa Clara County Fire Department's Vasona crew has been managing fuel breaks as a way to mitigate hazards and improve wildfire resilience. County Fires were known as is a member of the county's Regional Imagery and LiDAR program. And County Fire is also exploring using LiDAR and GIS techniques to track progress and support measurements of mitigated hazards. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. We'll now open it up to questions. We have one already on.
That was super interesting. I think the part that was interesting, the first one, if you could, do you mind bringing up the first one? There was housing or buildings relatively close. As a post exercise, did you socialize with the homeowners the fact that you did this and show this to them, be like, we reduced fire chance of burning your house by 20%, or do you have any kind of numbers to market the value that you've been doing, and or do your bosses need that to sell the services that you provide? Because obviously I imagine you wish you could do 100 more of these projects, but you just don't have the funding for it. So have you ever thought of using it as a funding source to, with the stages of the model, bring it to homeowners and be like, hey, this house looks nice. You might have money to support us with 20 grand so that you don't lose your house, and then do public-private partnerships in order to generate more productive outcomes?
Yeah, that's a great question. As the GIS analyst, I don't really deal too much with the funding.
Policy question, sorry.
Yeah, but what I can say is our Vasona crew only does work primarily on public lands. So because this land is owned by the town of Los Gatos for the public library and police department, they were very happy with this project. I can also say that other duties that I do for the fire department is managing our wild and urban interface inspection GIS program. So every year we send out letters to all the homeowners in this area and tell them of the wildfire risks. And we also set up a whole GIS system for our inspectors to go out and inspect. And we report all those properties that have violations to the city and county for follow-up. And it's a great process. Every year we do about 4,000 inspections. We catch lots of properties that have, that are violating the state requirements and city requirements. There is growing interest from this work. This work was mostly targeted on fuel breaks, but within our fire prevention division, we're also interested in using LiDAR to pre-assess wildfire risks for each property before our inspectors go out there. So more or less giving them kind of a heads up on what the fire risk might be before they actually have boots on the ground to inspect.
Yeah, that made me think about it. Do you have any examples where there was a fire afterwards and then you were able to show them that you reduced the intensity of the fire? Like accidentally, a year later, there was a fire at that same location where you had done the prevention, and then you had looked at the LiDAR data post-fire and said, in this scenario, we see less extensive damage and cost or something like that. That would really bring it home to sell your services.
Yeah, that's also a great follow-up question. We're rather good at suppressing wildfires before they get to sort of a larger size to threaten structures. So luckily, we haven't had necessarily the opportunity to do that kind of analysis yet. But I do know that earlier this year, there was a fire that was spreading in unincorporated Los Gatos in a community that was thankful that we sent them our annual fire notices and did inspections because we went out and did the inspections in that neighborhood and confirmed that there were low fire hazards. And so when the fire was spreading, the homeowners were, kind of patting each other on the back and saying, hey, good thing we did the work that we needed to do when the fire department told us fire season is coming.
While we're walking over there, I'll just ask one quick question from online. Do you use any feature extraction to identify individual trees in the LiDAR data? If so, how successful is it?
We have not done feature extraction yet. There's definitely interest in that. So the metrics that I presented on were acres for different strata. We're definitely interested in quantifying fuel load and tons per acre for specific vegetation classes. So that's more or less the next logical step for us, which is to target specific fuel classes and identify not just how many stems or trees were removed, but the tons of tree that were removed also. So feature extraction at that point will be really helpful.
So I have two questions. One is the LiDAR able to see the dead trees labeled somehow? And the second one is, how do you identify these trees so that the fire crew knows to hit that tree, not the tree next to it?
Yes. So the first part to your question, how can we detect if a tree is dead or dying? Well, I didn't show an example here, but for a conifer, it's the limbs more or less are straight or grow up, and then a dead conifer is kind of drooping. So it's really easy to see that visually. Another way to pick those out that I didn't present on it, but doing a biomass change so if the biomass above ground and below ground is changed, that's an indicator that the tree has dropped lots of its leaves and limbs and things like that. And so in the LiDAR data, it pops out, pretty clearly, and you can go, what's going on with that tree? And you go, oh, okay, it's dead. Also with a little help of some other vegetation indices, so we can look at the greenness and the amount of water content present. It's rather easy to pick those out. And what was actually unique is for one of the trees that I saw, our Visona crew didn't actually see it because we more or less stay to our 200-foot boundary around our strategic fuel breaks. And there was one tree that was just outside of that 200-foot mark that you couldn't see it from the fire road. So for our next iterations, we'll be able to target trees that are more or less outside of that range, to be a little bit more helpful. And sorry, what was the second part to your question?
The second one was, how do they know to target those trees that you labeled?
At this point, all this analysis was done in post. So the Visona crew is, fully trained professionals for targeting hazards without any LiDAR analysis. This analysis comes as a way to help measure and augment how much work needs to be allocated for next year. Helps us get more grant funding by having those metrics and those measurements, allowing us to quantify things like that.
I'll just.
I'm just wondering, the LiDAR data is coming from, so you guys hire some vendor, or you guys have a drone or something?
We don't have any drones, but we're lucky that we're a part of this great program that's managed by Yoko and Wade right up here in front, which is, the County LiDAR and Imagery Program. Wade, do you want to add a little bit on that? Plug?
Maybe Yoko is probably the best one to do a plug on that. They were just interested in our imagery and LiDAR collection and who we use, but I guess we can.
Sure. So the imagery and LiDAR program, so the LiDAR is collected every 3 years, and for the entire county with a quality level 1, which is quality level is about 8 pulses per square meter, and that will identify probably fairly enough as Peter's example, like you can kind of see the classification looks pretty real. And also the classification itself, I think I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's about 11 classifications we usually use. And vegetation is 3 of them, low, medium, and high, on top of just the ground and snow and some other items. So if you are more interested in, you can just come talk to me afterward.
Yeah. And just to add, Yoko, 2 other classes in the vegetation, or in the LiDAR that's helpful are buildings, and then power lines are really helpful for us also.
Okay. There is one more question right here.
I was curious if using LiDAR is at all applicable to areas for prescribed burns, and have you used that at all?
For the fire department, we haven't used the LiDAR yet for identifying fire behavior for prescribed burns. But that method is well known. So, it's really good to identify, the ladder fuels that connect surface fuels to canopies. So a ladder fuel, maybe I didn't describe it clearly, but a ladder fuel is a piece of vegetation like a young tree or a tall shrub that connects the ground plane up into the tree canopy. And so by targeting those and you removing those, you can almost ensure that a fire that's spreading with a low intensity and low flame length will creep along the ground and not actually get up into the canopy. And this is actually how lots of our lots of our forests were maintained with native prescribed burn approaches. So with LiDAR we can target and identify those, but right now the department hasn't approached that yet, but it's a great idea.
There was one more question online. Does County Fire have a UAS capable of collecting LiDAR data on demand, which I think is a question back to us. So at the moment, we're doing collections every 3 years, but that's something we can look at, I guess, and get back to.
Yeah.
Unless, Yoko, you want to comment?
Sure. I guess right now we are collections, and because of our collections for the entire county, the using the drone is not the most efficient way. We always use an airplane. However, if we have some specific needs for some specific area, certain parks or buildings or power lines, whatever, like it's more like a very small specific project area, that would be something we can consider. So if there are any kind of use cases, please just feel free to reach out to me.
We will also send out our contact information, or you can, I think it's GIS, or I'll double check that, but we'll send that out.
Great, thank you.
It's on our website. Thank you, Peter.